Good morning, everyone. We are just about to start. So, hi, Patricio. Hi, Hal.
Hi, Tomás. I'm glad to be here with you and Hal and everybody from different countries.
We will wait just a couple of minutes and then we will start, okay?
Very good.
Thank you.
Good morning, Pedro. Hello, Luis. I am reading the chat.
Francisco, good morning. So we have a sort of a register of where people are today.
That's great. We have almost 50 participants from Tucumán, Argentina.
Lucas great. Palacios, that's great. René Faraghi from Santiago de Chile. Welcome, René. Cecilia Sanchez from Peru. Welcome, Cecilia. So it seems that we have a number of different countries, people from different parts of Argentina and from Chile, Peru. Good morning, Eduardo. Good morning, Jose Luis from Argentina.
Uruguay.
Welcome, Carlos from Lima. Hola, Juan from Buenos Aires. Andrea. Benvinda. Hello, Monica from Costa Rica.
We are about to start. We are just waiting. Estamos esperando unos minutitos and we will start shortly, okay?
Laura, good morning.
Okay, now yes, I think that we should start in order to respect the schedule of our interview. Good morning, everyone. Thanks again for joining us today. My name is Tomás Donovan. I am a partner at Ingu Nelson, and I will be co-hosting this interview with my partner, one of our founding partners, Patricio Nelson. Hi, Patricio.
Hello, everybody. Nice that you're here with us.
Okay. Well, as we previously said, we are now almost 60 participants. We have people from Argentina, Peru, Chile, Costa Rica, Uruguay, Spain. And well, thank you all for joining us today, especially in such a challenging and stressful moment. And before presenting Hal, I want you to include a very brief introduction to our company in case you don't know us. We are a consulting and training firm based in Argentina with 20 years in the market, and basically the core or the heart of our work is helping organizations, teams, and individuals to achieve better results through better relationships. So we have three core specialties: negotiation, leadership, and innovation. So I wanted to give you a general overview of the structure of this event. We will spend the first 40 minutes interviewing Hal, and we will discuss different issues which are especially relevant in the current context. And then we will have 20 minutes for a Q&A space where you will be able to exchange your questions, thoughts, insights with us. Important thing is that you can write down your questions either in Spanish or in English, and we will translate them if necessary. Okay, so it's my pleasure to introduce Hal Movius. Hal is an old friend of our firm. And one of the global leading experts in the field of negotiation, emotional intelligence, and leadership. He's CEO of Movius Consulting and has published several articles in Harvard Business Review and two amazing books, Build to Win, which has to do with creating world-class negotiation organizations with Larry Susskind, and Resolve, which was published in 2017, Negotiating Life's Conflicts with Greater Confidence. He lives in Virginia with his wife and two children. So Hal, once again, it's an honor to have you here with us. Welcome.
Thank you, Tomás. It's great to be with you, with both of you, and with everyone joining from a variety of countries. I'm delighted.
Great, thanks, Hal. Patricio?
So I think we can start with the first question. Hal, I wanted to ask you about your first book, Build to Win. As you see, it has a little bit of wear and tear. I've taken it with me throughout the world doing negotiation workshops and consulting. And in this book that you wrote with Larry Susskind of MIT, you bring this notion that negotiation isn't only an individual capability, it's also an organizational capability that an organization can work on, okay? So maybe you can tell us a little bit more of how you define negotiation as an organization capability, and what have you seen since you published Build to Win in 2009 till now? What have you seen that organizations are doing to build this capability?
Yeah, sure. So Build to Win was sort of born out of the frustration that Larry and I had as trainers, as people who care about doing really good negotiation training. And people would come to the Harvard program on negotiation where we were teaching, or we would go to them somewhere, and there would be a lot of excitement about training, and everybody would get very excited for a day, 2 days, 3 days of the training, and they would vow to do things differently, and we would go home, or they would go home, and we would call them, you know, or email them maybe 6 weeks later, 2 months later. So what have you done differently? What's new? What have you applied? And although sometimes people would tell us really great stories and, you know, we did this new thing and we got a much better deal and it saved us a lot of money, we love hearing that. But to be honest, most of the people, most of the time, were saying, oh, well, you know, in our organization, it's just very difficult. We have a cultural issue. We have this. We don't have sufficient investment. Those people in the other functions, they don't understand. They weren't at the training. A whole list of things that kept them from really doing something that would have a big impact on the organization. Mm-hmm. And we thought, well, most organizations, even nonprofits, government agencies, big corporations, small startups, they all depend on good negotiation to get results and sometimes to survive. Everyone is buying and selling things, partnering, looking for trades, looking to leverage resources. So we thought maybe the problem is that we're applying the wrong kind of intervention. And mm-hmm. instead of just doing training, maybe we need a more ecological approach to go into the organization and understand what's happening there. Why does the organization think it needs negotiation training, for example? Right? And many times the answer is, well, we did an internal survey and people listed negotiation training as something they wanted. Okay, but what problem are we trying to solve here? How would we know if we've solved it, and so forth? So what we've seen people do, so that began us on a real, it was very humbling, frankly.
Absolutely.
And, you know, you get nice things on a sheet of paper. Oh, this was a great training and so forth. And then you want to believe that you've made a real difference and people tell you that you have made a difference. But if you're really diligent and you really look hard, if you shine a light in the dark places, you see that there's so much more work that should happen. So what we've seen since then, and I think, you know, this is not an exhaustive list, but it's a list that I guess I paid attention to because of the recommendations that we made in the book. And I would sort of say there are 3 kinds of things that I think that are trends that I see organizations doing with negotiation. Mm-hmm. The first is more organizations are paying a little bit for an assessment up front that gets them a lot in the end. And the reason it gets them a lot is that it helps them to identify who should we send to training? Who else should be in the room? What should the purpose of the training be? How should it be tailored or customized so that the exercises that people do and the teaching points are really relevant and familiar to the people, that it really disrupts their thinking in a helpful way. So that's the first thing. And to do that, you need a sponsor. It sometimes takes time, but you need to find someone senior enough in the organization to say, okay, yeah, I will invest more. I'm going to hold you accountable. I want to know what I'm going to get from this at the other end. But I will do a very quick assessment, 3 weeks, 4 weeks. You talk to 15 people. We've talked from as few as 6 people and as many as 55 in one big global healthcare company. It didn't start with a list of 55. It started with a list of 10.
In different areas, Hal, or are you talking just to salespeople, to people who are in purchasing, different areas?
Yeah, it started with one specific function, mostly in one country. But when it became clear from talking to those people how they needed to collaborate with other functions to be successful, and how teams needed to work across geographies to be consistent and aligned, other people started saying, you better talk. I heard you're talking to people about negotiation. I have something to say about that. And so that's how 55 is a large number. Usually 6 to 12 is sufficient for anything below a very large global organization.
And different hierarchies, Hal, people who are going to be in the training and maybe their bosses also, no?
Exactly right. Yeah, exactly right. Different function. You want to be cross-functional typically, and you want to be to include the stakeholders, right? For the people that are on whose behalf the negotiators are working. So that's the first thing, assessment. The second thing is, following from that, I see more companies deciding to do a mix of things. So let's sign up for training, but let's also support the people after training with coaching. And let's also think about how to do some case study writing. So that, let's say we try to apply something and we run into a problem, a second order problem. You know, we thought about putting together 2 packages this time, but when we did it, the other side said, no, we sent you an RFP, submit 1 package. So now we don't know what to do. So people need help applying things in different contexts where there are constraints. And it's really important that the training isn't the end of the story. And again, that doesn't have to be a super expensive engagement. Sometimes 10 hours of coaching after training is enough to take a team through to a really good outcome. And then the last thing that, sorry, go ahead, yeah.
Do you do like individual coaching or team coaching? It depends, maybe both, no?
Yep, both, absolutely. Sometimes you start with an individual negotiator and then you realize that they need the approval of people more senior, and you need to bring them into the conversation and share some of the language and terms and thinking with them. Go slow to go fast sometimes.
Right, yeah.
So, and then briefly, the third thing is more tools, toolkits, customized ways. You know, if you go into a sales group and they already have a sales process and they already have a CRM and they already have all these things, and you say, you should do these, here's a good move as a negotiator, here's a way to create value as a negotiator. And they say, yeah, I can see that, but I have to fill out this form at the beginning and 4 other people are also talking to the customer at the same time. You know, I have all these problems. So it's that too. It's saying you need to commit as an organization or at least a business unit or a function to aligning around a common set of tools and language. And the companies that I see doing these 3 things, doing a little bit more upfront, combining training with support and aftercare, and developing a set of tools that people can use for a long time, they are definitely reaping rewards from that. And that's what we mean by negotiation as an organizational capability, that it really does bolster. When you negotiate more effectively, you save money, you make more revenue, you don't destroy relationships when you disagree with partners or suppliers. And so that's great. That was the gist of that book. Sorry for such a long answer.
Crystal clear.
Very good.
Going a little bit now to the interpersonal or psychological side of the negotiation. In your last book, Resolve, you made a very strong statement regarding the role of confidence as the main predictor of negotiation performance. No? Confidence in Spanish will be not confianza, but autoconfianza, like being really secure about our thoughts and our beliefs. So the question is, first, can you develop a little bit more? How do you understand the concept of confidence? And second, and perhaps more important, what does it take to build real confidence as a negotiator without having to be like a little bit aggressive or arrogant or foolish?
Yes, great question. I wrote this book because I was confused. My wife will tell you I'm still confused about many of the things that I wrote about. But in any case, I asked a lot of the people that I respect the most in our field, what do you think about confidence in negotiations and conflicts? Should we be trying to help people become more confident as negotiators, or is that a bad idea? And in the world of psychology, there's a lot of research on mental biases, cognitive, all sorts of ways in which our brain moves very quickly and tends to favor our own point of view and tends to forget to look for things when we imagine the other person's point of view. And so the answer I got from most people was, yeah, confidence makes things worse. When people are confident that they're right on both sides, then that makes it harder and worse. So don't teach people that. And I think in many ways, the business school and the professional training world reflects that. We try hard, we get people to come to training, we give them difficult simulations, then we show them that they were suboptimal, and they say, oh, yeah, wow, I could have done better, aren't you? But you're very smart, Mr. Instructor, you're very smart, right? We were all suboptimal. And so it leaves people maybe a little less, like they're interested, and they're like, wow, I'm glad I came to this training, this was very important stuff, but I was suboptimal. So right. Meanwhile, we were seeing all the way up to boardrooms and CEOs, people would say, oh, conflict is, I hate conflict. Yeah. It's the biggest problem I have. And frankly, I'm a very conflict averse person. I don't show it, but I'm very, I just hate it. And so I thought this is a really interesting contradiction. The professionals are saying, don't teach people to be more self-confident. But most of us out in the world are saying, oh, I wish I didn't feel so nervous about conflict and negotiations. It's such a difficult thing to do. So when I did the research, the big breakthrough was sort of thinking confidence is not like, it's not a single dimension. It's not like sort of Goldilocks, the three bears, where you don't want it too much or too little. You should be somewhat confident, not too confident. Instead, we're really talking about three different things. We're talking about developing mastery, which is the behavioral and communication confidence. I know how to answer that criticism. I know how to present our proposal in a way that's convincing. I've practiced. And to develop mastery, we have to practice. And people don't do that, but they should.
And it's something that you can do without thinking, no? Without being...
Yeah, so it's almost like becoming fluent. Like when you first start trying to play the piano or improve your tennis game or cook a souffle, you have to kind of go step by step, and it feels very awkward and it doesn't all happen. And then after practicing, you can kind of do it without thinking. Now you're just playing the piece, or you're just cooking the dish without having to look at the recipe all the time. We should do that with negotiation. We should practice, and there are better and worse ways to practice, but most people don't. So that was the first thing. It would be good to practice and develop greater confidence in how we communicate and behave. The second thing is, it would be good to be more emotionally confident. And we call that poise. If we could summon and maintain our poise, our sense of calm at difficult moments, that will help us to think better It will help us to communicate more effectively. But research tells us that conflict is extremely threatening to the brain. The brain is on very high alert around interpersonal conflict. And many of us don't regulate emotion that well. And I can talk more about why that is and what to do about it. But that's the second kind of confidence.
Hal, would you say that poise is like emotional balance? Like you lose your balance because conflict is so threatening, and how you get your balance back, like in the spur of the moment, almost, no?
Yeah, it's how to stay calm but alert, to feel that you have many options in the moment, even when the tone or the problem is very difficult. It's that balance is a good word. Balance is a good word, I think. So that's the second kind: mastery, poise, and then the third kind is awareness. And here is where we don't necessarily want to teach people to be more attached to their beliefs going into a situation. We want instead to help them expand their awareness by using a set of tools and concepts that will remind them to pay attention to certain things. And that's because our intuition tends to lead us astray when we look at situations. We forget to think about the constraints that the other side faces. We forget to think hard about what their interests might be. We forget that even though we think our product is amazing, not everybody may see it that way. And so we have to use some tools to force ourselves to be a little more humble in our thinking and beliefs. Oh, I know this customer for 15 years. I know what they're going to do. I know this. They won't want that. They'll want this, and so forth. That's what gets us into trouble when we dig in around what is the market rate for this, and what's fair, and which pieces of the past are relevant to what we're proposing now. And everybody thinks they're objective, but of course, we're all not. So those are the three pieces of confidence. Two of them we want to work hard to kind of bolster. And then one of them, this awareness piece, we want to kind of work hard to build, which means in a way making ourselves more humble about our initial impressions as we approach a conflict or negotiation.
That's very interesting, Hal. And I was thinking the importance of taking care of the three dimensions, because if you get too much mastery, perhaps you can become a little bit arrogant, no?
Yeah.
So that's why it's a dynamic system. And I wanted to ask you, in your experience coaching leaders, coaching negotiators, which one of these three is more challenging generally to improve?
I mean, I'm going to give you a frustrating answer, but I think all three are very difficult. It's difficult to get people to think. Negotiations and conflicts are already typically very complicated situations. Mm-hmm. There are multiple relationships, multiple issues, and so forth. So we all have a tendency to want to kind of just get simpler. Okay, let's talk first about price. Then we'll figure out price, then we'll talk about the next things. It's, especially in the world of technology and so forth. So to tell people at the beginning, no, we need to make things a little more complex. That's hard to get people to do it. Once they've done it, then they see the benefit. So that's hard. Mastery is hard because people don't practice they don't practice, and B, when they do, they don't practice in the right way. Why don't people practice? Well, it feels embarrassing to, take your iPhone and, film yourself presenting a proposal. People, I don't want to do it. And worse, what if other people are watching me? What if my boss is watching me practice? I don't want that. I'll just get criticized and so on. So people don't practice. And how should they practice? Well, they should practice very specific moves using a process leader who says, okay, look, like imagine you're playing tennis. You don't sort of like play a whole set and then have the instructor say, now on your serve, you have to do this. And when you go to the net, do that. And your backswing is off. And can't do all of that at the same time. But if you say, let's focus on opening, what are the first 3 sentences we want to say, right? And we say, well, we don't know. Maybe they're going to be friendly. Maybe they're going to come in and yell at us. Okay, well, let's practice both versions. Just that, just 30 seconds. What are the first three sentences? Stop, try it again. Get one piece of feedback, just one, right? You took too long to get to the point. Okay, let me try it again. You have to get very specific, and you have to make people feel safe in the same way that you do, again, when you're trying to improve any complex activity through a coach or a helper. It doesn't help when people tell you how wrong you are and give you 37 things that you did wrong. But we see many consulting firms, I won't name names, but we see many big firms come in and run mock negotiations in front of 300 people, and it makes everything worse, in my view. So that's hard, but it's less hard if you do it the right way. And then the poise thing, maybe I'll wait on that, just because I think we're gonna talk maybe a little bit about close relationships, but learning to be better at thinking about emotion and thinking about our own tendencies and learning to read emotion in others. That's really at the heart of what I recommend in the book. Yeah. I won't go into more detail because I feel like I'm talking an awful lot already.
So let's get into that, Hal, because I think that at the heart of what's happening nowadays with COVID-19, we are spending a lot of time in our homes with our family. At least I'm with my wife, my 2 kids. There isn't room for all of us to be doing like Zooms all the time, and we have to negotiate a whole bunch of things. There's more conflict. It seems that in a certain way, I'm worse at solving conflict with my family than with my business clients.
You're not alone. Everyone on this call is saying the same thing to themselves.
I thought I've had a great time. I have a great time doing these 5 months, but anyhow, I find it's hard. And also sometimes it's hard in close relationships to understand the real issue, like, what is it that we're talking about? It's not about me being, for example, now I'm in my daughter's room, no? But it's, when I had this conversation with her, it was not about me being in her room and she having to leave the room, but more if I was respectful of her and her room and, just have a talk about that. So maybe you can, because in your book, Resolve, you have a whole section about managing conflict and negotiating with close relationships and family. So maybe you can tell us something that, where are you in that front?
Well, again, I would just say it's one thing to, I like to say research is me search. So I have the same problem as many people do, right? If we could just work out how to negotiate with our teenage children or with our parents or whoever it is, right? Our wife's family, our husband's family, so forth. So the research tells us that people, when they negotiate in close relationships, don't tend to do very well. And part of the reason is that we're too accommodating. We don't push each other hard enough to solve problems. We just sort of say, okay, whatever, yeah, fine, I'll cook dinner. Whereas we might, with a little more effort, have figured out that I could start the dinner and then go do something I need to do. You could finish the dinner and have time to do what you need to do. We would have been better off. But we tend, because relationships with our family are so important, it tends to be sort of trade, I'll do it this time, you do it next time, and so forth. But the bigger problem is the one you're describing, which is so often these conflicts have long histories and long patterns. And what we're talking about is not really what we're talking about, right? You came home too late, you're late again, right? Okay, so what's the consequence of my being late? Nothing, but this is the third time in a row. Okay, but so what? Right? What are we really talking about? Well, we're talking about, I'm going to have an issue trusting you. And I was frightened that you came home late. And right, we don't say these things out loud. So, so a really key thing. I think there's a few very simple things that we can learn to do, and I describe a few in the book. But one is to think really hard about when to have these conversations. Mm-hmm. And, you know, maybe the most powerful move we can make is to be better at not getting pulled into an argument or a conflict at a moment where we're probably not ready to resolve it. You know, 8 o'clock at night or 10 o'clock at night, or after we've been driving or we're stressed. So I think this is very important. My wife and I, early in our marriage, we made a rule called the 6 o'clock rule. We said we don't talk about anything important or difficult after 6 o'clock in the evening. We just make a time. We say, okay, what happened today really irritated me. Can we talk about this over coffee on Saturday?
Right.
And then I feel better already because I know we're going to talk about it. And by the time Saturday comes, I'm less emotional and I can say, listen, what can we do? That was difficult for me. I bet it was difficult for you too. What could we do differently next time? And that helped a lot. Just that one move. Don't do it at that moment. The second thing I think is really helpful is to think about how to frame a problem in a way that doesn't sound like a criticism. Right? So can we talk about the fact that you were late?
Right.
We need to talk about your behavior. We need to talk about etc. And when we start that way, you know, research tells us 75% of the time in interpersonal relationships, when one person criticizes the other, even in a very subtle way, like I could smile at you and say, well, I guess someone was late again. You know, ooh, just sticking the knife in, I'm smiling, but it's a criticism. 75% of the time, the response is defensiveness. And we know this from John Gottman's research at the University of Washington. Malcolm Gladwell wrote about this, the Love Lab, where they can look at newlyweds having an argument for 15 minutes, and they can predict with 90% accuracy who will be divorced 3 years later. It's incredible, that research. Yeah. So that's the second thing, is how do you frame the problem in a way that doesn't blame someone? And then the third thing is to learn a little bit about, and Jim Cohn, our chief scientific officer at Movius, Jim and I are doing a lot of work now training teams and leaders to be better at coding emotion, at learning to recognize these reliable emotional behaviors that lay traps for us. And some of them have to do with our own feelings about feelings, because some families and some cultures have feelings about feelings. You know, it's right. Like, well, you know, anger is not an attractive emotion, right? Or, you know, men shouldn't feel, you know, get over it. You shouldn't feel sad. Come on, be strong, you know? Yeah. And when we do that, that is also a trap in relationships, because it interrupts a really useful role that the emotion could have played. And one of the things that was most interesting to me about the research that Jim brought was the fact that anger is actually often very helpful in conflicts and relationships. That's surprised me. I've seen so much training around conflict management saying, like, how can you express that how can you not be angry? Now, anger, the problem with anger is it leaks into, when you suppress it, it leaks into other forms of emotional behavior: contempt, criticism, belligerence, which is kind of teasing or making jokes that aren't really funny, that are kind of really attacks. We don't say that we're angry, and instead we do these other things that, again, create a really bad dynamic and prevent problem solving, when sometimes what we really need is just a clear, like, stop, or I don't want to talk about this now. Poof.
Right.
The function of anger is to make a boundary. And sometimes that is really important, and it stops something in the conversation from happening so that problem solving can resume. So anyway, yeah, all I can do is sympathize. It's so difficult.
No, I definitely agree with you that repressing our emotion, repressing our anger, isn't helpful, no? And it will leak out in conversations, and we have to find a way to put it in the conversation in a helpful way, no? In something that's constructive. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Great, Hal. I wanted to ask you about another hot topic today that has to do with virtual negotiations, no? And this connects with that you recently published a Harvard Business Review, very brief and powerful article summarizing what research tell us about how to manage these situations, both in terms of barriers or obstacles and opportunities. So could you please summarize the main insights of this line of research, and also connect this idea with confidence and how perhaps we feel less confident when negotiating virtually, so we can reflect and mix both subjects, no?
Yeah, sure. All right, well, how to summarize? So the first interesting thing was there's no obvious place to look for research on virtual communication. It's spread out in lots of different fields. So it was a fun task to try to look at the experimental research. And as you can imagine, in the last 5 years, as video has become more prominent and texting has become more prominent, you suddenly have a lot of studies, but very recently. So what I found was that the first really interesting thing is that doing what we are doing now by video is really costly to the brain. And what I mean by that is I'm looking at the two of your faces, and everyone who's joining us is maybe seeing 3 faces. And maybe there's a little delay in the audio, or maybe they're having to squint to see us. But your brain is working really hard to try to make sense of this exchange, when if we were face-to-face, it would be working a lot less hard.
Right.
That was a very interesting finding, because I think we assume, well, video must be the best alternative to being face-to-face. And so most companies, most teams that I see, you just have people like 6, 8, 10 hours a day they're on these video calls. And I think that's a terrible idea for a reason.
Exhausting. It's completely exhausting. Yeah.
And it's not the best way to solve certain kinds of problems. And I'll say more about that. So that's the first finding. The second finding, which is a little contradictory, is in negotiations, the richer the format, the better the outcome. So it suggests to us that if you have a really important negotiation, you should try to do it face-to-face, but in this time, maybe you should try to do it by video. So I'm trying to reconcile these two things. Video is costly and difficult, but maybe when it matters most, you should use it. So those are 2 findings. The recommendations I made, I think those are the 2 most important ones. The recommendations I made, which had to do with some other related findings. 1, make meetings by video shorter. Don't try to do, if you were going to have a 3-hour meeting with a government agency or with your supplier, don't say, well, let's just do it by video. Because, why? Well, it's exhausting, inefficient. You're much better to say, let's spend 30 minutes taking this aspect of the problem and discussing that. Then maybe we email about some other aspects of the problem. Then when we really need to talk, we do another 30 minutes. It's just not worth it to, and same with us teaching. I see some of my colleagues saying, well, I was going to do a 2-day workshop, so now I'm doing 16 hours by Zoom. You're going to kill people. Don't do that. So keep it briefer. At the beginning, Research tells us it's a really good idea to do, Patricio and Tomás, exactly what you did at the beginning of the call. You connected to people a little bit, you know, to just say, how are you? How are things there? What's the weather like? How is your family? I mean, it depends on the relationship. If I'm talking to the Minister of Health, I have to think of the right way to say something.
How's your health?
How's it going with COVID over there?
An easy question.
The research tells us any connection, anything that builds rapport at the beginning generally makes it more likely that you'll get agreement and increases the value of the agreement. So that's the second recommendation. So keep things short if you're going to do it by video. Try to build rapport at the beginning if you can. For people in Western cultures, not so much for people from collective cultures like in East Asia, but for those of us in the West who come from more individualistic cultures, if you can minimize the picture of yourself, like when you're on Zoom and you're talking, that is a good idea, because it turns out we are more self-conscious and more distractible when we see images of ourselves. And so I think that's useful. I try to minimize myself. The last thing I'll say is just, again, to think really hard about what is it that I want to do in this conversation. If I need to go through, let's say we're negotiating an agreement and I have 50 pages, you know, getting on Zoom and then putting up a PowerPoint slide, each page, it's a terrible way to do it. It's much better to formulate an agenda in advance and say, let's tackle, you know, the first 10 clauses in the agreement, etc. We don't have to do that by having video. In fact, it's better, I can direct my attention to this really complicated, you know, agreement that I'm reviewing. If I don't have you on video, now I can really look at this and think about it. So when I coach teams very often in complex preparations, we'll do some of it by video, particularly like the beginning, hi, how are you, etc. Then we might shut off the video and start to talk conceptually about documents, about ideas, because now I'm letting my brain do more work that is more valuable, and not this, which becomes at a certain point not as valuable. So those are the main, there's a few other recommendations in the paper, but those are the ones that stand out for me.
Okay. Thank you very much. And we have a first question, sorry, Patricio, that is very related with this. So just to open the Q&A, if you agree,
sure.
I will read the question. Having, in the middle of this COVID context, having companies experienced virtual negotiations, basically, could it exist a temptation to keep negotiations mainly online due to lower costs as the main factor? Do you think in the new normality is a high risk for companies to make this mistake, sacrificing efficiency and pushing colleagues to more transactional negotiations due to the virtual environment?
Yeah, that's a great question. Let's put it this way. For the last 20 years, I've told leaders and teams, if you really have an important negotiation, go do it face-to-face. Okay, you have to spend $5,000 on airfare. It's a $10 million contract. You know, this is a no-brainer. We have enough research to know that trying to do things by email and so forth is just less efficient. There's too much room for misunderstanding, and you don't get nearly as much information and fluency as you do in an active conversation, particularly, by the way, in Latin American cultures, which are like the most fluent, you know, it is so organic and less formal in a beautiful way. So I think that's been my advice. Now, I will say I have been surprised in the last 5 months at how adaptable people have been in negotiating by video and through other means. And it's definitely not optimal. And I hope when we go, I hope that the new normal doesn't preclude being face-to-face at some point in the near future. But I do think companies will think hard about when being face-to-face is really most likely to be important. For example, and do I need to send the whole team, let's say, to problem solve something? So I think with video is going to get faster, better. You know, who knows, we may have virtual holograms of ourselves in the near future. But I do think we'll find that being face-to-face is irreplaceable for certain things. And I think those things are when you're making a relationship at the beginning, or when you're trying to deal with a problem that has made people emotional and upset, right? Or sometimes if you have a multifunctional team that is trying to solve a complex problem, where you have technical, financial, logistics, all, you know, how are we going to deliver this new version of our technical product in this new economy, etc. Maybe we need 8 people around the room. And again, doing that by video. So but the two important ones I think have to do with relationships. At the beginning, when we're making a relationship, and at moments where we feel like there's the potential for losing trust or losing connection, there I think we could make the case to companies that you will manage your risk more wisely and maximize your revenues and save money on your suppliers,
right,
by investing and having people be face-to-face. So the answer is yes. I think companies will be tempted. If I were a CFO, I would be looking to save money, and I would say, why can't we do it the way we did during COVID? And the answer is because the research tells us that that's not always the best thing to do. And if you really want to maximize your revenue and minimize your risk, you should send people to be face-to-face for at least some of these moments.
Right. The positive thing is that we are going to be more aware that we can choose one thing or the other one, when perhaps before we just go to the face-to-face. It was an assumption, no?
Exactly. I think that's true. I think that's...
Yeah.
So we have 2 more questions. There's this question from Lucas Palacios, who is in Tucumán. He's in procurement, and he says, how could he understand better when to stop or to continue pushing just to get what he wants in a negotiation? Sometimes it happens that you feel you can get more, then the other party says it's enough, okay? Then you keep pushing and get it. But when you leave the room, you realize that you got it, but maybe that is not going to be accomplished. So maybe it's, you know, this phrase that you won in a way you lost the negotiation, no? Because you got something that's going to be very hard to implement, maybe something like that. What's your advice on that, Hal?
Well, I think it's that particular problem is a symptom of a larger problem that procurement faces, which is that some things are easier to measure than others. So very often procurement people are told to achieve certain goals, right? Cut our spend by 5% and make sure these new terms and conditions are implemented. It's very positional. And the opportunity to create value, you know, maybe my supplier has a new way of packaging the thing that they're sending to us that could save us a lot of money when we have to unpack it or whatever it is. So part of the problem is pushing harder is if you are in procurement, working really hard with your different stakeholders at the outset to explore whether there are things that could make life easier. I like this question that starts, what if? What if we could get them to do 24-hour shipping? Would that matter to you? Yeah, that would be good. What if we could get them to pay more liability? Does that matter? Not so much. What if? So, because typically what happens is procurement has this thankless role of going around and getting everybody's objectives, and then they have a long list and they make an RFP, and then they try to evaluate what comes in against the RFP, but you can't create value that way. So you get sucked into the game of pushing because it's like, well, what can I do? Well, we can argue over price per unit. And then I can show my boss, like, yeah, they said 5, but I got them to 4. And then I look good. So I'm not trying to be dismissive of the problem. It is a very it's part of what makes negotiation an organizational activity. Because if we want people to create value, I mean, where I've seen procurement really excel is when they've thought really strategically about something in a way that's moved the business, right? In a way that changes our whole warehousing process. Why? Because maybe the supplier said, you know, I don't know if this is interesting to you or not, but ... We have a new technology, we have a new thing we're doing, or whatever. That's where big value can get created. So part of what I try to encourage the procurement people that we coach, and for those of you in procurement, Tom Kinnaird, who and I have a paper in Harvard Business Review from January about sort of how do you create value, how do you navigate procurement processes more effectively. Tom was the chief procurement officer at WPP Group for 30 years. But that's the problem is by the time you get to the table, you're already boxed in. And so the work that I think procurement people need to do is much more work preparing with stakeholders so that the game becomes something other than how far to push. Because when you are just in a tug of war, maybe you win the first time, and maybe you even win the second time. But at a certain point, you've squeezed all the value out that you can, and also the supplier's not happy with you. So right. It's the wrong game to be in.
Thanks, Hal. There's another question from Pedro Fleming, who says that how should we approach a negotiation when the other party doesn't want to negotiate? That's a tough one, no?
We have to ask ourselves why.
Right.
First step is to ask why don't they want to negotiate? And usually it's because they don't see any benefit to negotiating. So therefore, we don't have a negotiation yet. We have a persuasion challenge. Negotiation can only happen when each party has something that might be of value to the other side. And when we don't have that yet, I see salespeople all the time saying, I'm going to go negotiate with the customer. But how do I do that? Because they don't want our product. Say, okay, well, you don't have a negotiation yet. You have to persuade them that maybe there's something that would be of interest to them. So I think that's the answer. The answer is to recognize, the problem is not a negotiation problem yet. The problem is simply the problem of how do I persuade them that there might be some benefit to them. You know, so I can lower the risk, I can increase the upside, I can shorten the time, I can, etc. And if people don't believe that, then you're not negotiating yet.
Right.
And I would
Good answer.
A more political challenge of finding out through whom could I reach that individual with more power, no?
Exactly, because sometimes, it's so true, Tomás, sometimes let's say there's no benefit. I'll give you an example. I have to keep it confidential, but some years ago, I was involved trying to resolve an impasse for a life-saving drug. And it was expensive, this drug. And the government basically said, you must lower your price by 80% or we're not even going to talk to you. And at some point, the families of the patients got upset and started, throwing rocks at the government buildings and so forth, and throwing rocks at the healthcare company building. And the problem was that the group that was saying no, saying you have to lower your cost by 80%, they were the gatekeepers. Their job is to evaluate the cost effectiveness of this drug according to a pretty narrow set of criteria that for various reasons were not particularly helpful. And so they were never going to be the right person. And instead, the right person was actually at this moment the Minister of Finance, who needed very badly to get costs under control in the country and to show to creditors that they were getting a handle on these costs, and to be able to take to them some long-term deal in which the initial impact was not really big, and in which allowed the company to not make public the amount of the discount that they were providing. That was the solution. But to your point, Tomás, we had to find who is the person. There may not be this person because that's not their job. Their job is to say yes or no and then to take a position around it. But maybe there's someone else who's looking at a whole set of broader interests and says, no, this is really important. We need to start being more innovative in how we resolve these things. So,
very good example. Thanks, Hal.
That's great. So, Hal, we have 1 minute. What can you say in 1 minute? Maybe, maybe goodbye.
Start the clock.
So I was just a few words on what's the future of the field for you. You know, we've talked about negotiation as an organization capability, then how to develop confidence, how to negotiate with close relationships and family. Now we are talking about what's happened with COVID and virtual negotiations. What do you think this field is going towards? What do you think are going to be the major sort of breakthroughs in negotiation in the next few years?
You know, I wouldn't dare try to predict the future, but I'll tell you where I hope it goes. Okay. Where I hope that two things happen. One is I hope that the research world and the world of real world problems become better connected. And it's what I know you guys do. It's what we try to do in our practice, is to take seriously the problems that people in organizations face when they try to use new ideas that are good ideas, but it turns out to be difficult to implement them in a complex world, in a complex organization. And we as researchers can do better by taking their problems seriously and seeing how we can advise them and help them. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is, I hope the field remains interdisciplinary and becomes even more interdisciplinary. One of the things I love about negotiation is there's a huge research literature for decades, thousands of studies from neuroscience to anthropology, social psychology, emotion, close relationships. We need to be more aware of that literature. There are too many people running around teaching negotiation who just, are teaching what they think is right based on their 20 years in sales or something like this. There is a lot of evidence now, and my personal mission through books and other things is to try to bring that evidence, closer to real world problems so that people can use it. So those are my two wishes.
Wow. Thank you very much, Hal. Thank you very much for being here with us, and maybe we'll have you again and
I love it.
Have your book in Spanish.
Perfect.
Soon.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Okay. Thank you very much, Tomás.
Thank you, Hal, once again, and thank you everyone for being here this morning. We will send you after this webinar some material so you can read and deep in more the ideas of Hal. So once again, thanks. And I'm reading Hal many comments thanking you, and they appreciate a lot your insights. So really honored to share these ideas with you. Thanks again.
Happy to be with you.
Thank you very much. Okay. Thank you, Hal.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you, everybody.